Welcome to Vantage Point Podcast, a podcast brought to you by NWR Communications and 92 Studio. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. In this next episode of Vantage Point, we're joined by Brian Ward. Brian's the CEO and founder of Aroa Biosurgery, which is listed on the ASX under the ticker ARX. It's a soft tissue regeneration company that's committed to unlocking regenerative healing for every body. They develop, manufacture, sell and distribute medical and surgical products to improve healing in complex wounds and soft tissue reconstruction. Particularly interesting is the use of the novel extracellular matrix biomaterial derived from ovine, which is in fact sheep, forestomach. Brian's a really good guy and a company that we've worked with since they floated on the ASX in the peak of COVID, which was interesting times. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Brian, it's great to have you in today and good to see you back in Australia. Obviously, Australian Open's on. Big tennis fan?
Absolutely. Look, I don't go to a lot of games, but I'm really looking forward to the event this afternoon and then going on to that. Yeah.
It'll be good fun. So before we get sort of into the detail on Aroa, perhaps you could just start with, I know you were a practicing veterinary surgeon and had your own practice and whatnot, but can you just sort of step right back? It's 15 plus years ago now. Which probably makes you feel a little bit old. But how did you come to founding Aroa and how confident were you that you'd actually had some chance of success way back then?
Yeah, well, so just sort of going back on my career, so I've done a range of things before I came to Aroa. So trained as a veterinary surgeon, spent some time in practice, and then I've worked for a range of large pharma and medtech companies throughout the world. So I've always been involved and interested in innovation, commercialization, and my career in those companies has had a lot to do with that. So, I've got more interested in the startup world and looking at what are those opportunities to build new companies. And I was kind of intrigued by the emergence of this field called regenerative medicine. And the big insight was that soft tissue reconstruction, typically what people have done historically was to use human-based tissue for some of these soft tissue procedures. And what we began to learn was that actually if animal tissue was processed appropriately, it was very well tolerated by the human body, and so it opened up this opportunity for a whole range of new tissue sources that were readily accessible and didn't have some of the challenges of disease transmission. So I thought, hey, that's really interesting, and what opportunities are there to look at new tissue sources, and particularly where those sources are plentiful and could be better than what had previously been used. So that kind of got me started on the journey.
And how did you come to realising that sheep was the best bet?
Yeah, it's a really simple story. I'm a simple person, so I basically started at the nose of the animal and worked my way towards the tail, looking at different organs and how suitable they might be. And thankfully for me, not too far away from the nose is the sort of first organ that you bump into, which is like the stomach. And and in New Zealand and Australia, certainly there's lots of sheep, lots of cattle. So if you look out the window, there's sheep there. So it's like sheep, stomach. Then did a little bit of work with a university to see, hey, does this kind of make sense? And just on the face of it, it looked like a really good idea. So that's kind of how the whole idea came together and got seeded.
And if you could just sort of give us a bit of a background around how much actually goes, obviously the company's been listed on the ASX for a couple of years now. It's been around for 15, 16 years, and obviously there was ideas even before 15 years ago in terms of formation of the company. But how much work goes into, if you could just give us a bit of a background around the sort of pre work, but then all the different testing, then approvals and all of these sort of different things to get to this point?
Yeah, so I'd done probably a couple of years work myself before setting the company, and that was both personally but also with some academic institutions. And so that was preceding the company. In the first 5 years of the company, when we were angel venture funded, we didn't have a product. We were it was a bunch of people, myself and some of our scientists, trying to prove that it wasn't a science experiment, that was actually a company. And so there was an enormous amount of work. Did two things really. Proving out the material, and that was in fact probably a really, really good source of this type of material. And then secondly, developing a process that optimized that material so that you ended up with something that would have all the favourable characteristics. There's a huge amount of work went into that, and we were particularly fussy. I think we could have settled for something less than where we ended up, but I think we were particularly focused on two things. I think the first thing was developing a leading material in terms of its performance, but secondly, being able to do it in a efficient, cost-effective way so that we could do it at scale. And I think on both those criteria, we've done really well. So I think we've ended up with this material that probably is, I think it's probably one of the best ECM materials in the world, but we'll also be able to produce it at a very affordable cost. And those two things sort of set us up for a whole lot of advantages sort of more generally within the product categories that we compete.
And just before we get into sort of product portfolio, how do you sort of look at, talk about your materials and making sure it's world class? How does that sort of stack up or compare to the synthetic? What does that sort of landscape look like?
Yeah, so there's sort of two types of materials that are used in soft tissue reconstruction: biologics and synthetics. And within each of those categories, there's a range of different materials. So I think the first thing is on the biologic side. We think the porosity of this material, so the size of the holes in it and the biological composition of this is superior to those other materials that are there. And what that means is that cells will move into it quicker and lay down tissue quicker. So what you tend to find is biologics tend to be used in the most complex procedures, where the patients are typically compromised. They have really poor healing, and they need all the help that they can get in order to heal some of these injuries and some of these wounds. There's another class of products called synthetics, and synthetics tend to be used as a more run-of-the-mill product if it's a simple procedure, if it's a straightforward patient, and relatively not complex, then sometimes synthetics will be fine. So it's not really, I don't sort of think of it as one or the other.
Right or wrong, yeah.
I think it's both, and it's the right product for the right type of wound or injury that surgeons select.
Yeah, and just when we're talking about wounds and whatnot, so zeroing in on the product portfolio, can you just give us a bit of run through on what they are, how they sort of differ in terms of the makeup, myriad versus endoform, etc. Sort of finished product, but also, most importantly, what they treat in the markets.
Yeah, so essentially our technology is really useful in patching holes in people that are difficult to heal. And so there's two types of broad categories. There's chronic wounds, and so those chronic wounds typically occur in older people, and older people with other diseases that are affecting the healing. So diabetes. So people with diabetes commonly have diabetic foot ulcers, and these are due to poor circulation, lack of feeling in their feet. They develop these wounds that are very difficult to heal, and so that's that's a big use case for our for some of our products. There's other injuries like venous leg ulcers, pressure injuries that are also chronic wounds where our products are used. So that's one category. The other category is in acute surgical wounds, and so these are wounds that occur during surgery where the surgeon may remove tissue for reasons. So, for example, in cancer surgery, they'll resect out a large area of tissue, and then they're left with a hole that they have to patch up. And so, in those sorts of cases, our products will be used to patch that hole to allow them to put the person back together. Another example of that would be in trauma. If you've been in a car accident or a motorbike accident, you might have lost some skin, you might have lost some muscle, there's no easy place to take that tissue from to patch that hole, then the surgeons will use our material to put the person back together again and patch those holes.
So does it basically sort of almost act as a second skin, and you talked about the sort of porosity that's actually able to, the cells are able to grow through it? Or
yeah, it's sort of, there's two things. I think, the first stage is just, like you say, a second skin or something to pull everything back together again and get it in place. So it has that sort of structure that allows everything to be put back in place. But then the other thing is it acts as a shortcut to being able to heal these wounds. So rather than have to build the muscle or the skin from zero, which takes a long time, you have this structure that cells can move into, and it's preformed, so that gives them a big head start. So they're almost like 60% there, and then the cells fill it in and turn it into tissue. So it'll turn into muscle, fibrous tissue, skin. So can be used on the surface of the body, but also beneath the body to patch these sorts of holes.
And in terms of the biologics, and not wanting to harp on too much on the biologics versus synthetics, but from a recurrence or an issue rate on Aroa's products, what does that sort of look like? Has there been many sort of issues in terms of people coming back in and not working? How does that sort of look versus synthetics?
Yeah, so biologics tend to be used in the most complex cases where there's infection or there's been complications, and often that's been as a consequence of the use of synthetics.
Yeah.
So they don't tend to have the same rates of complication. And the way to sort of think about that is, biologics are a more natural product. They're seen by the body as something that they recognise that's like them. Synthetics tend to be seen as a foreign body. So, they're like plastic. If you imagine putting a piece of plastic into your body, the body recognises that as, hey, this isn't normal, this is not right, so I'm going to have to respond to that, and they respond to it by trying to isolate it, trying to wall it off, or trying to push it out. And so you kind of get the two very different responses to these sorts of materials.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And just stepping back into the sort of markets that you're treating and the sort of typical procedures, on whether it's breast reconstruction and whatnot, how big are those markets? At the moment, Aroa just operates in the US. What does that look like from a sort of TAM, total addressable market size?
Yeah, so we're 95% of our business is in the US. We're very focused on succeeding in the US. We think that's the gateway to the rest of the world. The TAM for the products that we have commercial at the moment is in excess of $3 billion. So they're large opportunities, and typically in devices, you can add another 40% or so for the rest of the world. So they're big markets, and in each of the categories that we compete in, we can certainly be in the top three products, and in some of those categories, we aspire to be the leading product. So there's a long runway ahead of Aroa in terms of the potential to grow the company.
Yeah, and so with I think probably 3 or 4 of the products operate basically on one technology platform. Can you talk to us about Anivo? That's a sort of key R&D project. Aroa, and it's how long? When did you sort of start working on that? Why did you start working on it? And what does that look to treat?
Yeah, so with our initial products, all based on the Aroa ECM platform, we've been exposed to a lot of soft tissue reconstruction, and being involved in those procedures, a common challenge that we've seen in those procedures is that when surgeons are repairing these holes in people, they need to separate a lot of tissue away from that wound to get access to it. And then once they've patched it, they've got to put all that tissue back together. And what happens is that it's not easy to get that tissue back together again. It's a bit like when you when you fix a motor or something, you pull all the parts together, and it's like, oh, now I've got to put it together. And if sometimes you get it back together properly, sometimes you don't. So what they end up with is spaces or cavities between the layers of tissue. And in those cavities, you get the accumulation of fluid, and it's either blood or other fluid that leaks into those areas, and that affects that accumulation of fluid affects the rate of healing after surgery, and it predisposes the patients to complications. And a little bit like earlier when I said, those patients that have existing underlying conditions where their healing is impaired anyway, so cancer patients, diabetics, people with vascular disease, that's very challenging for them, and they can end up with complications where the surgery fails because it doesn't heal. And so our insight, having been from working in this market, is that if you can allow them to be able to do a good repair with our Aroa ECM products, but then also remove those cavities after surgery and bring all the tissue layers back together, you'll get a faster healing response and you'll get less complications. And that's got to be good for the patient, but it's also good for the hospital, because what the hospital doesn't want is to have have them bouncing in and out or staying in the hospital longer than they need to. And so that's where the Enivo product came from. So it's essentially using the Aroa ECM material to provide an implant at the same surgical site, and that implant allows us to deliver a vacuum which comes from a small pump that's outside the patient, and that vacuum, when you apply it, it draws the tissue layers together and holds them in place. So it's a little bit
like a vacuum seal.
Exactly. It's like putting a plastic bag on a vacuum cleaner. It sucks everything together, holds it together, and you hold those tissues in place, for 10 days or so. And that's long enough to make them stick and avoid that fluid accumulating. So, we see this as something that builds on what we're already doing, something that creates a whole new class of product, and something that, brings a lot of value both to the patient but also to the hospital.
And in terms of the sort of background around that, how long have you been working on that?
Yeah,
and,
so
I know there's been a significant amount of money invested to date as well.
There has been, yeah. So we've been working on that for 4 or 5 years, and you go into these projects, right, and you think, hey, this is going to be simple, and
you make it sound simple, just the vacuum seal.
It's tricky, right? So, you go into it, you think this is going to be a simple problem, we're going to nail this in a year, and it turns out, as always, to be a bit harder than you thought technically. So, we had a kind of skunk works, for when I say 4 or 5 years, half that time it was a skunk works thing kicking around. We were trying different ideas, and then we got to a solution that we thought would work, and then we've scaled up the activity, particularly in the last couple of years. So, we've probably invested $20 million or so into that project. We've had, initially a small team of 4 or 5 people turned into a team of 30 people. We now have the product, and when I talk about it as the product, we see this as a new technology platform that potentially will become half a dozen products over time. So we've invested in this with a view that if you put this alongside the Aroa ECM material and all of our existing product portfolio, we can build a product portfolio off this as well, and then the combination of these two portfolios will give us a very strong position in the future. And that's kind of why we've been committed to it. It's not, we haven't, what we're not doing is going off and chasing something new. What we're trying to do is change the standard of care in these types of procedures.
And I think that was something that I wanted to touch on, that I've heard you talk over the years, just in terms of continuity of care in hospitals. And I just sort of wanted to touch on the sort of US hospital system, but how important is that for a hospital, and what's the sort of benefit for, obviously, better patient outcomes? That's the number one, but hospitals, businesses at the end of the day as well. How does it sort of look? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that improves the proposition for Aroa that use the ECM, and you've got this basically an end-to-end that they're not bouncing in and out of. You've got the predictability and understanding of how the products work. You've got one company that you can talk to and train up on all of those products. How does that sort of look?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely key. So, the US hospital system is quite different from probably what we think about in Australia and New Zealand, and the drivers behind what makes products successful. And I think the way, when we think about our products, we're very focused on the variety of stakeholders that you have to satisfy and deliver benefits to in the decision making for products. And so for example, it's the surgeon. So the surgeon, you've got to make the surgeon's life better. It's got to be an easy product. It's got to be something that fits within whatever the reimbursement is. It's got to be something that potentially is financially beneficial for them. So they want to see that as well. And so same for the hospital. The hospital has to see that this is a product that delivers better outcomes for the patient, but also delivers financial benefits for them. And as you sort of think about the patient moves through different settings on their healthcare journey. They're in the hospital. They then go to the outpatient setting. They may be at home. They may be in some sort of nursing care facility, and each of those different sites of care has both clinical and financial interests. And so having products that can transition with them into those different sites of care, but give you a solution across all of those sites of care makes sense. And it takes time to build that, and it takes time to get that continuity working. And that's something we're very focused on, is providing benefits for each of those sites of care, but linking them together as well to give a better outcome for the patient.
And practically, in terms of how you actually sell to hospitals, is it hospital by hospital, or is it a hospital group that owns many hospitals? How does that sort of look, and how many staff in terms of sales team do you now have in the US?
Yeah, so hospitals in the US, there's a variety of different sorts of hospitals. There's for-profit hospitals and not-for-profit hospitals. They tend to be aggregated together within hospital systems. And so the way selling works for us is, firstly, focusing on specific types of surgeons that are high users of our products. So we sort of target particular procedures, particular surgeons, to get a product into a hospital. Typically a surgeon will do an evaluation, so they'll want to do 3-6 cases, get a good sense of how that product works in their hands. Now, you'll have clinical data that will get them interested, but they're always interested in, in my hands, how does this work? So you typically do an evaluation. If they have a positive response and they can see the benefits of the product, then they will advocate for that product within the hospital. And so take it to a value committee. So there you'll have administrators, people looking at that from a from a contracting, logistics, financial perspective as well. And if you can tick all the boxes on that, you'll get it into that hospital. Typically, hospitals have what they call a formulary. So it's a list of products that they're allowed to use. And then you'll get onto the formulary. Now, the hospitals that we tend to target, what we're trying to do is get into hospitals where that formulary is a formulary that spans many hospitals. So they're part of a hospital system. I'm into this hospital, but in reality, I now have an opportunity to have access into 20 hospitals. And so you kind of open up this wider group of hospitals where you potentially have access.
Is it typically a bit of a political process? It sounds like going into the surge and then having to go to the top and go to committee.
It's a people heavy process. So there's lots of logistics behind it. You've got a variety of interests. And so it's not straightforward. It's not the same in every hospital. So it takes time. And I think it's we've seen this over the last couple of years. During COVID, post-COVID, and the with the challenges of manpower and things like this. The value committees were less regular in terms of meetings, so some of these things were a little bit more difficult. The counter to that, once you're in, it's actually you're there for a long time because the guy that comes along behind you is going to have all of that and more to get in there.
And particularly given that you're driving successful patient outcomes.
That's it. Yeah. So you kind of, and I think that's, when you sort of think about medical companies, I think that's the tough thing is it's really hard. But the great thing is it's really hard because once you get there, nothing changes quickly on you, and it's a very long run business. And what you tend to do is once you gain access, as you build your portfolio, you just tend to roll on and develop momentum. So I think it's tough. It's a tough business in the beginning.
That's why it's taken 15 years to be.
But then you have this capacity to build significant organisations.
And when we look at something like Enivo, obviously it's going through the FDA process, 510K, etc. Assuming that's done, sort of premonition there. How does it look like to then start selling that into the hospital system? Is it going to the surgeons who already use the ECM? Does it make it easier, or do you start all over again?
It's a good question, and it's something that we talk about internally. It's the same surgeons. It's the same procedures. It's the thing, and I've never seen this before, but the thing I love about talking about with Enivo is if we go and do a workshop with surgeons with Enivo, they literally snatch it out of your hand, and they'd use it tomorrow. There's nothing else like it, and they feel the pain of this every day, and they can see the utility of the product. There's two things about Enivo. And to be honest, I don't want to take away from what we're doing now, because I think what we're doing now, there's a huge amount of opportunity. I think Enivo's the accelerator. And I say that because, number one, it just drives interest and excitement, and that'll drive visibility and awareness. So I think, without actually without the sales that come from Enivo, I think it just will elevate the company to a whole different level. I think, but then it'll give us I think it just gives us the opportunity to begin to own a lot of these procedures by ourselves. So I think there's, we're doing well with what we've got. I don't want to lose sight of that, but I think Enivo is a turbocharger for that in the future.
And just in terms of Enivo, once you do start selling it, I'm assuming you have to use the Aroa ECM products to knit it all together.
Yeah, it's a system of healing. Yeah. So it's not a bolt-on, and even from a sales and marketing perspective, there's going to be integration between these products.
Yeah, which is exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Just stepping back, trying to understand the culture of the business. Obviously, you've got PhD professors, and then cold hard sales guys, and US selling to hospitals. How do you sort of staff is around 300 now? It's gone from 1 to 300 in over 15 years, admittedly. How do you sort of manage the sort of different personalities, because they're very different, to either motivate them or sort of measure, perform, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's evolved a lot, and it's different. I think one of the things that I love about working in this type of business is that you've got every character and personality type that you can think of. It's like a football team. It is. It's like that. So everyone's got a role to play, and everyone is a contributor, but different people need different things. And I think we're, if you sort of, I think if you sort of think about it right at a top level, I think everyone within the company is very committed to what we're trying to do as a company, and I think there's a lot of alignment around that. So, they see the technology platform that we have, the product portfolio that we're developing, and the ability to change outcomes for patients. But also, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, the ability to unlock regenerative healing for everybody. And so one of the challenges with ECM type materials is that the use of these materials has been limited because they've been horrendously expensive. And so, what we're trying to do is, and we are doing, is making them more accessible. So making better healing more accessible, but also changing the standard care in healing. I think everyone's very aligned around that. And that's, to do that, we've got to do a range of different things. And so we've got to develop great products. And so, our development team's very focused on that. They're technical people. They love coming up with new things. If they can see that they've had their paw prints or fingerprints on something that is changing someone's life, that's hugely satisfying. Our salespeople are different. Our salespeople, what spins their wheels is, I want an exciting product that is going to engage surgeons, and I can see that I'm going to be very successful selling. And so and that's a more. It's I'd say it's financial, but it's also the people in medical sales are driven by patient outcomes as well, and so they've got this wonderful job where they can be financially successful, but also have a big impact on healing. So I think, great products, a culture. I think, the culture is important as well. I think we have a very, open kind of learning culture where, we're pretty straightforward. We try to, I think internally, externally, try to do what we say we're going to do. And we're not, we're probably a little bit Kiwi-ish in a way. We're more about delivering the results. Yeah. And we don't want to talk up a game that we can't deliver, but we think that over the long term, we've got everything that we need in order to be able to deliver, to build a really significant company. And I think that's kind of what we're focused on. When you sort of talk about how do you manage it, how do you sort of think about KPIs and things, I think it's, I do think about that differently in different parts of the business.
You have to,
at a high level with the executive team, we have a common group of, business objectives and key results that we're really focused on, but everything kind of feeds up into that.
And a bit of a curveball, but how do you sort of look at 5 years ago, Brian Ward, CEO, to today, and how have you sort of changed in terms of elevating different people beneath you and sort of to have them sort of alongside?
Definitely. I think I've been in this job for 15 years, and so it's the way I think about it now, and I think I've been coached well on this. Is my job changes every year, and so if I did what I did last year, this year we're not going to be successful. And so it's very much about changing what I'm involved in, where I spend my time, and how I can deliver value to the company. And that requires me to bring on board great people, let go of stuff that I've done before, acknowledge the expertise and specialty skills that other people can bring, and really leverage that. And so I think it's about getting better people, developing
getting
people,
better people than yourself to do the
that's
job.
it, and me getting out of their way,
exactly.
And allowing them to do their job. And that's that took a little bit of getting used to. But I think it's also it's created space for me to grow and develop in different ways as well. I think moving from being a CEO of a private company to a public company, it's different. And there's certainly I've got a wider group of people that I interact with now, particularly on the investor side. So, we're even now we're a relatively tightly held company, but our institutional base has grown massively, and so now rather than having half a dozen major shareholders, I've got 20.
Yeah.
So that's a different kind of dynamic. You sort of have to deal. It's sort of interesting making the change to being priced on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's always.
I've never had
always
that.
a scoreboard.
That's the scoreboard's kind of different, and so. When we were private, you've got a view of valuation, but it doesn't change daily. And certainly it's linked more to company performance rather than company performance and external factors.
Noise, yeah.
So there's that kind of stuff, so it's sort of different. Having said that, I really enjoy it. It's been... It's opened up a whole new world for me, and
always learning.
Yeah, always learning, and it's also if we hadn't have listed the company, we wouldn't have had access to the capital that we have over the last 3 years, and that's been transformational. It's allowed us to build a commercial organisation. It's allowed us to employ some of the good people that have really made a difference. So. It's been completely worthwhile.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So yeah.
And just probably to close off on, if we look at, I know this is always a nice, fluffy, soft question, but if we look at, Aroa, obviously Enivo sounds like the Kindle on the fire in terms of accelerator and whatnot. How do you sort of think it looks over the next 3 to 5 years? You're going to have the maturity around Myriad, Symphony, and Touchwood and Evo. How does it look like for a business?
I think there's a lot of things happening beneath the water within Aroa that aren't, they're not obvious in terms of the improvements and the gains that we're making. And I think we're building a lot of momentum in the organisation. If I look back 3 years, when we listed, we were doing just over $20 million.
I was thinking about that, yeah.
We put on 20 or so a year. We had a little bit of, a couple of ups and downs in that. And, there'll be a little bit of that in the future, who knows, But, if I sort of look forward, we, not too far away, this company will be north of $100 million. Within 5 years, I'd like to think you're getting up to 200. And when you think of those numbers, we're only just starting to hit the inflection point on a growth curve. So, it's got a long way to run. If you look at the risks and the uncertainty in these sorts of business, I think we've proved out a lot of those. So now it's momentum, it's the kind of things that's clinical data, it's a bunch of things, but I don't see I see the risk around those hurdles now as starting to sort of fall away.
Because talking to risk, how many procedures have you completed?
Yeah, we've done, we're up in, I think it's north of 4 million or something now. It's a lot of patients. It's a lot of patients, so you sort of think, you sort of hear things like, are there complications with this technology? And it's like, man, we've treated a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Go to the FDA site. We've got hardly any complications. And,
across 4 million. Yeah,
some of these patients have been train wrecks.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, the data doesn't say that there's anything wrong with this. I think in the more clinical studies that are run on this technology, it's just proving itself out. So.
And in terms you talked about 5 years, when do you think you're not tapped out in the US, but when do you start to sprout your wings?
I think so. The way we think about the rest of the world at the moment is we're exploiting that through local partnerships with distributors. There's a lot of opportunity outside the US. I think the challenge for us is we have a finite amount of resource, and every dollar we spend outside the US, we're not spending that dollar in the US. And so I think being very single-minded on succeeding in the US is the best thing for us, and that could run for another 5 years. We've still got a long way to go in terms of building out the kind of infrastructure and sales organisation that we want. And I think the risk is that we try and do too many things too quickly, and we're sort of middling in what we achieve. So I think, staying focused on that, the rest of the world will come. That will come, and we've had inbound inquiries from different parts of the world. We've got some really good partners in some parts of the world now that are really pushing forward as well, and that's great. That allows us to sort of stay the course of what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Fantastic story, very novel beginning, but obviously making lives much more improved in terms of the patient outcomes. You said it before about the sales team, that they're lucky to be selling and winning, but also making patients' lives better. It's a similar thesis on the investment side as well, in terms of investing in a company that is actually doing good for people. So it's a pleasure to be involved. Thanks so much, Brian.
Great, Simon. Thank you very much.